Yeah, so I don't know if I'm going like full inception here because I am a part of this news cycle, I guess, because I wrote about this at Awful Announcing. But what we're talking about is Tom Brady getting set to call the playoff game between the Detroit Lions and the Washington Commanders. And that's noteworthy because the Las Vegas Raiders, who Tom Brady co-owns, are currently in the middle of a coaching search, and they are reportedly infatuated with Detroit Lions offensive coordinator Ben Johnson, who I think is pretty widely considered the top available candidate at this point, with Mike Vrabel off the board in New England. But it's created this thing where I wrote about it, and my line on it was just like, hey, this conflict of interest with Tom Brady that we've been talking about all season, it's on full display here. Like, this is the epitome of what a conflict of interest is, you know. And there's two lines to this, and it's one, from a broadcasting standpoint, is he going to be willing to criticize Ben Johnson and the Lions offense if they falter? Like, how is the Raiders' reported pursuit of Ben Johnson going to affect how Tom Brady calls this game? And then two, how, like, what does this mean for the Raiders coaching search? Like, is this giving Tom Brady and the Raiders access and insight to Ben Johnson that other teams might not be privy to? And just how do the mechanisms work with that and with the restrictions that have been placed on Tom Brady? And so I didn't really take a stand on it as far as like, is this right or wrong? It was just like, hey, this conflict of interest is coming into full view. But I think what you've had now is kind of a backlash to that. We saw it with Adam Schefter during his appearance on Pat McAfee. Jimmy Traina wrote about it for Sports Illustrated, where their line is like, hey, there's no conflict of interest here. And to me, it's like, well, there can't be no conflict of interest. Like, you can downplay the conflict of interest. You can say, I don't think this is a big deal. I ultimately think this doesn't matter. I think we're making a mountain out of a molehill. But like, whether it's the appearance of a conflict of interest or an actual conflict of interest, to me, it's there. Like, to me, this is a storyline heading into this game that wouldn't otherwise exist if Tom Brady wasn't in these dual roles as the co-owner of the Las Vegas Raiders and the top analyst at Fox.
Well, maybe we can take a stand on if we think it's right or wrong at the end of all of this, but I think you almost can rewind further than that, right? Because there was the whole insider war, so somewhat on the front end of the Black Monday and throughout January off-season cycle here, where Tom Pelissero of NFL Network, most prominently, I think first came out and said, like, Antonio Pierce, Tom Telesco, the guys running the Raiders, like, Brady will have a significant role in determining their futures and ultimately replacing them once they were fired. Diana Rossini went along and basically confirmed that and added a little bit more to it. You had Mike Lombardi come out on the Pat McAfee show. He has basically just become the denier on Twitter of all things North Carolina football and all things Bill Belichick, where Brady was reportedly interested in Belichick potentially as a candidate. Lombardi said that call that might have happened between them was more just, picking Belichick's brain. There's nothing to see here. This is all nonsense. Then you have, as we kind of build out the stock watching of the stock watching here, the game now where that is on full display. But why do you think it is that, whether it's Schefter or I know Stephen A. Smith was very vocal with this and others, that there's just been this insistence that the dual role of ownership and announcing just doesn't matter? Like, why are some people so dead set on convincing us that this is nothing to see here?
I don't know. I really don't know. Like, is it powerful people protecting powerful people? Like, is it they're worried that if we call out Tom Brady's conflicts of interest, that other conflicts of interest, which are, prevalent throughout the industry, that those are going to suddenly come into focus? I really don't know, because I don't know how you could be a co-owner, and regardless of like how involved you think he is or isn't, he is involved. Like, he's not just like some guy who paid $1 million so that he can get nice seats to the Raiders games every year. Like, he clearly is a co-owner of the Raiders and involved to some degree in their football operations. And so I just think from that perspective, like, How could that not be a conflict of interest? I don't get it.
And like you said, there's also the difference between an actual one and the perception of one, and it almost doesn't matter what the reality is if fans watching at home think it's there, right? And so Tom Brady doesn't buy in to the Raiders to grow his portfolio of investments. Like, of
Right.
course if he's having to sign off on moves or he's around the facility, what are you going to not ask him? You know what I mean? And so about your coach or your quarterback or your whatever. And so the Schefter thing was just crazy where he's like, tying himself in knots saying heavily involved, like his voice is going. I'm like, what are you talking about? Of course it matters how involved he is and what role he's playing, because this is the part of it that I think maybe we can speak to even more so than the behind the scenes is for a viewer of the game. It just feels like you're kind of being lied to if it's not addressed, right? Because forget, like the machinations of does Brady get more access to Ben Johnson and whatever. That's for like, Raiders fans, Lions fans, whatever to care about, I guess. But for me, it's like I don't want Tom Brady to be kissing Ben Johnson's ass all game and not
Right.
know why or just be bothered by it or whatever. Like as if I'm Fox or if I'm Kevin Burkhardt for that matter, I want to deliver a good game to people. And if I'm worried that the dude over here is only caring about who's going to replace Antonio Pierce all game and not being honest that play call on third down was not the right one, that just sucks for everybody, even if it's not the biggest possible deal of all this whole thing.
Well, and I think, that's the part of it I'm more interested in than like, what does this mean for the Raiders coaching search? Cause I think, stuff happens behind the scenes all the time. I don't think we know like a fraction of how these coaching searches actually work and how people land the jobs that they do. But I think that, the likeliest scenario here is probably the Lions offense looks awesome and Tom Brady doesn't have to face that conflict. But even then, like, it just goes to show how unavoidable these potential conflicts of interest are going to be. Like, what's going to happen when he calls a game that Devontae Adams is in? What's going to happen if, like, let's say Max Crosby demands a trade? What's going to happen when he calls a Max Crosby game? Like, is he going to be able to call a Raiders game? Like, what, God forbid the Raiders wind up in a prominent position.
Or what if Dion doesn't let Shedeur go to Vegas and then Brady calls whatever team Shedeur's on next year and he's, taking pot shots at him and all this stuff. It's going to become so blatant at a certain point.
Yeah. And you had some of it when he was calling, because he called a handful of Tampa Bay Buccaneers games, and you had it where like it was kind of cute. He got into it with Baker Mayfield or took issue with Baker Mayfield's comments. Like, that's fine. That comes with the territory. But to me, it's like, this is unavoidable. And this like just goes to show why these restrictions have been put in place, why people had an issue with it, why so many people think it isn't sustainable, because to me, the most shocking part was it took this long to get to one of these. Like, when you just talk about the idea of an NFL owner calling games in the league, he owns a team. It's unavoidable.
So Richard Deitch at The Athletic had this idea that I think I want to throw at you, which is that Burkhardt and Brady should maybe not start the whole broadcast with it, but address it off the top. And Burkhardt should say, Tom, you have a vested interest in this one, don't you? There's been some rumors going around that you have your eye on somebody on that Detroit sideline. Tell us about it or whatever. And then Brady can just say whatever, disclaimer basically, and keep it moving. Do you think that's realistic that could ever happen? Or is that just like media dreaming?
I think that would be the best way to handle it. Like, to me, I think the annoying part is when they treat you like you're stupid. And so you're going to go through this whole broadcast where they're just ignoring the elephant in the room. So I think that's ideal. Do I think that's realistic? Like, not a chance in hell. I cannot fathom them, because it's even teams barely acknowledge coaching searches as it is. Like, we've just now gotten to this point where teams will put out press releases just acknowledging that they interviewed a candidate. You don't get anything more in depth than that. So I don't really know like what Tom Brady could even say to that point, but like, yeah, I think it should be addressed, because I think I ultimately think that's what people have an issue with. Is I don't think people have an issue with, Tom Brady shielding the Lions and Ben Johnson from criticism as much as they do the reality that we're all going to be treated like we're dumb because they're not even going to acknowledge that this is a real thing. And that's why I find the backlash so baffling, because you just like want to pretend like this isn't a conflict of interest. Like if this isn't a conflict of interest, then what is?
Yeah, and the perfect example was Al Michaels, who appeared on a podcast this week and said that anyone who criticizes Brady for this or anything else is just jealous of him. Okay.
Sure.
All right, Al.